Hello and welcome to Aqua Chat, where we will discuss various aspects of the tropical fish hobby. My name is Dr. Russell Breckwalt. I'm a veterinarian, and I do see fish from time to time in my practice here in the southeastern United States. We'll call this podcast In the Beginning because what we're going to talk about is starting from scratch. If you're new to the hobby and wanted to have a fish tank, we will discuss what goes into actually setting up a tank and what actually is going on in your tank. This will be review for a lot of you, but if you're new to the hobby, welcome, and we hope you enjoy it like the millions of us do worldwide. We will be talking mostly about freshwater fish, but many of the concepts that we are talking about today will also be applicable to saltwater tanks or a pond situation. So let's get started. For the most part, our fish tanks are what are known as closed systems. And what we mean by that is the water stays in the vessel or the tank and circulates around. We will contrast this with what you may read about or hear about as something called an open system. And what that is the water is generally the total volume of water in a tank will be replaced every so many hours. Or another example of that would be if you had a pond, say, next to a stream, and you diverted the stream water into the pond and then diverted the water from the pond back into the stream. So an open or an all-in, all-out. But for the most part, our fish tanks recirculate the water. Now the problem with that is, over time, waste products will build up in the tank. And this can be from the waste products that are produced by our fish. It can be from uneaten food. It can also be from the various microorganisms that do live in our tank that have lived their life out and die. So what happens is all this sort of organic waste builds up in the tank, which ultimately leads to the formation mostly of ammonia. Now, ammonia is, as you're well aware of, quite a toxic substance. And that's one of the reasons why it's used as a cleaner, because it kills a lot of things. And one of the things that it will kill is your fish. It doesn't take very long for toxic levels of ammonia to build up in your tank. This can happen within 3 to 5 days of setting up a new tank. Through various bacterial processes, this ammonia will be broken down to less toxic substances. The first of which is nitrite, which you may see represented by NO2 negative. I know that there's some chemistry involved in this. You don't really have to have a good grasp of chemistry, but I'm just trying to explain the process that is going on in your tank. Now, unfortunately, nitrite is also quite toxic. What it does is interacts with the hemoglobin molecule in the blood and renders it ineffective at carrying oxygen. So the tissues start to starve for oxygen, and you get multi-organ failure and death. Another aside from this is that the blood takes on sort of a muddy brown color. So if that's as far as we got, your fish would still die. But fortunately, there's another group of bacteria that will take nitrite and reduce it to a compound called nitrate, which you may see represented as NO3 negative. Now, nitrate is much, much less toxic, and it can be tolerated by your aquarium inhabitants up to a certain point. You'll see this expressed as parts per million. What a part per million is If you had 1,000,000 water molecules, a certain percentage of that will be nitrate. And most fish can live at levels 20 to 30 parts per million. We try to keep it under 40. If you're hitting 40 parts per million, your fish will probably be fine, but you're getting close to where where the nitrate may actually start affecting your fish. Now, this process that I just described does not happen overnight. Depending upon the size of your tank, it can take up to 6 to 8 weeks for these bacterial populations to build up. There are several products on the market today, though, that have these beneficial bacteria in solution. And you add them to your tank based on the volume of your tank and following the manufacturer's instructions. And this cycling, a term that you will hear, the nitrogen cycle, which is another term you might hear, and it can reduce this time to usually within a week. And your tank will be what is known as, quote, cycled. There are other ways that you can cycle your tank, one of which is if you already have an established tank, you can take some gravel from the established tank and put it in your new tank. These nitrifying bacteria that I'm talking about are what is known as sessile, which means they don't move around much. They usually find something in your tank to attach to, and that's where they live their life. So in an established tank, your gravel will have in the tens of millions of these things. And adding them to a new tank will help, quote, seed your tank with beneficial bacteria. You can also take filter material from your filter, a sponge, or something of that nature. You can take live plants from an established tank and put them in a new tank. The bacteria really stick to just about anything. Conversely, you can take gravel that you're going to put into your new tank and put it in a sack, and put that in a established tank, and let it sit there for 2 to 3 weeks and let the bacteria naturally populate these new stones that you're going to put into your new tank. Once your tank is established and you have your temperature set and whatnot, you can start adding your fish. Now, volumes of tanks will have sort of what is known as a carrying capacity. And what we mean by that is there will be a finite level of fish you can fit in a tank based on the volume of that tank. In the chemical equations, like for example that we just talked about, it goes from ammonia to nitrate. There actually is a fourth set of bacteria that live in lower oxygen levels in your tank that actually can take the nitrate and reduce it down to elemental nitrogen, which is a gas which just harmlessly bubbles out of your tank. But what can happen with chemical equations, we kind of talk to them as going left to right, that if you start to build up too much nitrate, it may push the equation back to the left. And what I mean by that is you can have nitrate, NO3 negative, which is relatively non-toxic, all of a sudden have a buildup of nitrite, NO2 negative, which is toxic, which can now go back to ammonia, which is toxic. And ways that nitrate can build up in your tank, I think the biggest one is overfeeding. All uneaten food will eventually settle into the bottom of your tank, and if not cleaned out, it will start to break down and once again produce these organic wastes, which again ultimately pretty much leads to ammonia, and then we go all over again. The other way is to have just too much fish in your tank, too many fish in your tank. Fish excrete ammonia through urine, that is true. But for the most part, fish excrete ammonia through their gills. So about every time that they're flapping their operculum or their gill covering, some ammonia is coming out into the environment. And in fact, the vast majority of ammonia in fish is excreted this way. So you can see that ammonia is constantly being introduced, for lack of a better term, into your tank through your inhabitants, which is why this nitrogen cycle is critical to be functioning before you can put anything in your tank. So this process of ammonia production and the breakdown of ammonia to non-toxic processes goes 24/7, 365. It's constantly going on in your tank. So what are some ways that we can prevent the nitrate buildup? Well, we talked about overfeeding or feeding appropriate amounts, and I think a good rule of thumb is feed your fish no more than they consume in about 5 minutes. And small frequent meals during the day is fine. You can skip a day of feeding. In the wild, fish don't necessarily eat every day, and if you skip a day here or there, I promise you it will not hurt them. One of the big ways that you can kind of keep nitrate down, and this is one of the things that you really have to do if you own a fish tank, is you're going to have to change the water. I think a good rule of thumb with this is if you do it weekly, change about a quarter of the volume. If you do it every other week, do about a third to a half of the volume. And what really does help is buying these, quote, vacuums, which helps to clear debris from the stones and keeps the stones clear. In this way, you will help cut down on the amount of nitrate that builds up and helps keep your tank clean of things like uneaten food and fecal material from your fish. Another thing that helps get rid of the nitrogenous waste, actually all three components, ammonia, nitrite, and nitrate, are live plants. I'm a big advocate of live plants, not only for their aesthetic value, but how they contribute to the overall health of your tank. And as I stated, plants will utilize ammonia, nitrite, and nitrate as a fertilizer, if you will, for which they get their nitrogen source, which of course goes into building proteins. So to review, new tanks need some time to set up. What they need time for is the development of colonies of these beneficial nitrifying bacteria to break down the waste that is inevitably going to form in your tank. Remember now that this can take a little bit of time. You will read things that may be called new tank syndrome, and what they're talking about is just this: the buildup of nitrogenous waste, and you do not have the bacterial populations to break this waste down to make the tank safe for your fish. With the advent of newer products, this nitrogen cycle, as it is called, can be decreased to usually within a week. I've tried these products before. They work very well, and they are readily available, fortunately, these days, so they're usually not too hard to find. You will have to clean your tank periodically to once again help keep down the final waste product, if you will, nitrate, and also to clean out any uneaten food or fish waste or anything else that sort of falls to the bottom of your tank. I hope you found this helpful. For those of you that are new to the hobby, welcome. We hope you enjoy it as much as the rest of us do. This has been AquaChat. I am Dr. Russell Breckwalt. As always, we appreciate you listening. Hope you have a great day.